Grace and peace be to you from God, our loving parent. I am Bishop Felix Malpica of the La Crosse area Synod, and I'm delighted to bring you a message. Even though you weren't able to make it all the way into town and celebrate with us at Riverside Park, you are still a part of our gathering. We are joined together as church, as Synod. So thank you for being a part of our collective ministry as we gather together to celebrate what it means to engage wild lament and whirling dance as God's people. So before I read the scripture, Psalm 30, on which those words come out of, let me set it up a little bit, because as we were planning for the assembly, we were looking through scripture, trying to decide what could possibly capture all of the many and various emotions that we might be feeling, holding, as we gather together for the first time since 2019. That as we gather together after a pandemic, after losing people that we love all around the country and all around the world, after so many different mass shootings recently, after also celebrating some amazing things that we as church were able in some ways to accomplish the impossible. That which we thought we could not do, we did over the last 3 years. How could we capture this sense of ecstatic energy that we might feel as we gather together for the first time, and yet we're gathering together with so many people and being a little bit unsure and uncertain as we are in this strange dance in between pandemic and not. And so we found these amazing words from Psalm 30, this cry out to God, expressing both this deep pain that was being felt, and again, this utter joy that is possible in and through the work of God in our lives. So let me read Psalm 30 for you. This is kind of a combination of translations, but as you listen, see for how this connects with you and your experience over the last 3 years as you meditate on what it means for us to be church together and the work that is ahead of us as we journey together as one church, as the La Crosse area Synod. Psalm 30. I praise you, Eternal One. You lifted me out of that deep, dark pit and denied my opponents the pleasure of rubbing in their success. Eternal One, my true God, I cried out to you for help. You mended the shattered pieces of my life. You lifted me from the grave with a mighty hand, gave me another chance, and saved me from joining those in that dreadful pit. Sing, all you God's faithful, pour out your hearts to the eternal with praise and melodies. Let grateful music fill the air and bless God's name. Their wrath, you see, is fleeting, but God's grace lasts a lifetime. The deepest pains may linger through the night, but joy greets the soul with the smile of morning. When things were quiet and life was easy, I said in arrogance, nothing can shake me. By your grace eternal, I thought I was as strong as a mountain. But when you left my side and hid away, I crumbled. O Eternal One, I called out to you. I pleaded for your compassion and forgiveness. I'm no good to you, dead. What benefits come from my rotting corpse? My body in the grave will not praise you. No songs will rise up from the dust of my bones. From dust comes no proclamation of your faithfulness. Hear me, Eternal Lord. Please help me. Eternal One, be merciful. And you did it. You turned my deepest pains into joyful dancing. You changed wild lament into whirling dance. You stripped off my clothing of mourning and sadness and covered me with joy and delight. You have restored my honor. My heart is ready to explode, to erupt in new songs. It's impossible to keep quiet. Eternal One, my God, my life giver, I will thank you forever. Now, I just, when I read it, it filled me with all of the many and various emotions that I was seeing. It said what I needed to say and didn't even know I needed to say. And that's the beauty of the Psalms. The Psalm is this beautiful prayer book that has been used by God's people for generations in order to exclaim something that is deep inside of us. And here we receive this beautiful tension, right? A call into wild lament and into whirling dance. Because, well, I know probably that when you first saw that our theme was wild lament, whirling dance, it probably made you a little bit uncomfortable. I mean, this area, right, is known for its stoic nature, especially amongst us Lutherans, that we don't necessarily dance in our sanctuaries, and likely also do not lament publicly, right? There's this powerful old Norwegian stoic nature that says, we will persevere despite anything, and we're not going to show it on our faces. But here in this psalm, we are called out of that and into something different. We're called out of, I think sometimes, because there's so much going on in the world. There's so much going on in our lives. And especially over the last 3 years, most of us are just tired. We're raw. And it's much easier to just go into apathy, to go into not feeling, into not sensing, and just to try and stay as comfortable as possible, not diving into either one of those things, not diving into the light, not diving into celebration, but rather just trying to stay in the middle, stay comfortable, not get too overly worked up in either direction. And yet, here in this psalm, there's a call. There's a call for us to feel. There's a call for us into action. There's a call for us to engage our whole selves, our emotions, our bodies, our communities in relationship with God, in relationship with others, in relationship with our communities, in relationship to all of creation all around us. That this call into wild lament and whirling dance is an opportunity for us to be fully engaged as God's people. And this is crucial to our mission statement as the La Crosse Area Synod, because we are being called to cultivate life-giving relationships rooted in God's love. And as we cultivate those life-giving relationships, we need to have eyes wide open to see the brokenness of the world and to wildly lament. That we need to be able to look around and see the depth of brokenness in our institutionalized racism, in global climate change, in our violence towards people who are different from ourselves, whether it be where they're from, the color of their skin, those who they choose to love, what political party they're associated with. There are so many ways that we build up boundaries between one another, so many ways that people are suffering, are hungry, are alone. And it might be easier just to look away, but we are called to wildly lament those things and also not just wallow in that lament, but we're also called as Easter people, as people know that there is a different way that God is at work. We're called into that whirling dance, knowing that there will be new life, knowing that God's abundance is a reality right here and right now. We are called to gather together to embrace this whirling dance, this joy, despite what is going on in the world, so that we can give one another the energy that we need to continue the work that is ahead of us. And that is how we cultivate life-giving relationships rooted in God's love. As I was preparing for this sermon, I found a fantastic article that talks about this interplay between great joy and lament. It was the Dr. Christina Astorga wrote an article based on this interface between the Filipino lakas tawa, this powerful laughter, this way of joy in the face of really difficult things, and lament. And I want to read to you their setup to this. It says, when Filipino lakas awa, this a power of laughter, this joy in the face of difficult things happening, and lament are interfaced, there are three aspects that run across both: paradox, self-transcendence, and subversion. Paradox is at the heart of both. It is where their truth lies. Paradox means that two seemingly disparate truths are held together in tension in a singular reality. The truth is not in either one, but in both, in the very tension. In lament, the raging emotions of grief and despair are in tension with profound sentiments of faith and hope, inarticulate as though they may be. This paradox is present in God, who is faithful and the one whose heart is turned towards God's people, but also a God whose silence is bewildering and crushing amidst the crying and wailing in the ruins. This same paradox is at the heart of Filipino lakas tawa, or what we might call whirling dance right now, that is festive and celebratory, but grave and militant. The incongruity of Filipino mirth in the face of danger and in the midst of war is paradox at its extreme edge. The Christian faith is full of incongruities. The most radical incongruity of all is the mystery of incarnation. God takes on flesh and human nature, and the most extravagant joke of all took place on Easter Sunday. There is laughter and gaiety in the heart of God. Our daily lives that are punctuated by puzzling, curious, and mismatched events may well be a sign of God's presence. But not all incongruities, however, are a cause for joy-filled laughter. There are tragic incongruities which turn our laughter into sadness and tears. But our Christian faith speaks of the laughter of the redeemed that brings us joy, that liberates, unites, and sets us all free. Whew, I could have just read their whole article and called it my sermon because, it is so amazing, so powerful as they talk about this paradox, which we should be really comfortable with as Lutherans. That is core to who we are, right? This saint and sinner, law and gospel interplay. It is in the tension of wild lament and whirling dance that we find what it means to cultivate these life-giving relationships rooted in God's love. And just to say a word about the other things that she lifts up. She lifts up the power of self-transcendence, of being able to re-engage again. That through lament, we can move out of apathy and into compassion. Because in compassion, right, it's more than just sympathizing with those who are suffering. It is more than even empathizing, right? Feeling their pain alongside them. But compassion is a movement, right? It's a movement that makes us work for justice and peace in the world, right? Compassion means that something is arising from deep within, from our bowels. We are being moved forward, right? With passion, right? We move forward into the world, and then because of that, right, it moves us into working with God to making the changes that are necessary in this world, that through whirling dance, right, we can move away from isolation, right? Because of the many tragedies of this world, we can have these tendencies to be alone, to find ourselves just this small little place of peace. But rather, dance is about community. Dance is about bringing people together. This joy that brings us together has the opportunity to bring us out of isolation into community, and through community, giving us the strength necessary in order to keep going back to that lament, to naming and claiming the brokenness of this world, and giving us the courage and strength to move into compassion and into action so that we can participate with God in doing what is necessary to give people glimpses of God's kingdom where there is peace, love, and justice for all people. And they also name out this subversive act that is present in both lament and this joy, their powerful laughter in the Philippines. For us today, we're thinking about this whirling dance that we're being called into, but it's an opportunity to be a voice of resistance, right? It's an opportunity for us in lament to say this is not okay, to say that having institutions that keep certain people down is not okay. Right? That some people, because of the color of their skin, because of where they were born, because of the language they speak, because of who they love, because you insert your thing here, they have less opportunities in this world. And that is not okay. It is not okay that we have distorted our relationship with creation all around us, and therefore the land mourns. That climate change is a reality, and that those who are being most affected are the most vulnerable and had the least to contribute to that brokenness, right? We need to be called out of our apathy and complacency through this act of lament, of wild lament, of looking and seeing the brokenness of this world that allows for us to defiantly call for God to break down these oppressive structures. It's an opportunity for us to wrestle with doubt, to wrestle with God. Where are you? Why aren't you listening? Where have you been? We have these promises. Why don't we see them as reality, right? These are things that ought to motivate us, right? Instead of allowing for these tragedies of the world to move us away from relationship with God, we ought to rather dive further into that relationship and hold God to account and say, no, you promised a better world. And we are going to hold you to account and ourselves too, right? And then, right, the lament part of it does the work of being subversive in the face of all these things. And that this joy is subversive as well in a different way. While lament helps us to break down those walls that divide us, helps us break down the many things in this world that are, well, sin at work in the world, this joy, this dancing, this laughter gives us an opportunity to build up. That in the face of all of that brokenness, we can have joy despite right? And so it's that counterbalance that we need, that counterbalance that we have an opportunity to gather together as community to see the world through a completely different lens. And to quote Christina once more, says, when our vision is changed, our doing is transformed. I'm going to say that again because I really loved that line. When our vision is changed, our doing is transformed. That through a wild lament and whirling dance, we might be able to see the world differently. That we might finally decide to put away the lie of scarcity, to put away the lie that says you must think about yourself and yourself alone, that you have to protect your interests and your interests alone, and rather begin to see the world through the lens of God's abundant provision, to see the world as though abundant life was possible not just for the many, but for all, and all, not just all people, but for all of creation, right? That God has given us the opportunity to participate in life and life abundant. That is why Jesus came into this world. And so we need to live into this tension between wild lament and whirling dance, to cultivate and develop a different lens of the world, to see the world through, so that our actions, our being, our doing can change. But how? How do we dance, in the face of such brokenness? How do we muster up the energy to do these things? And I say to you, apathy is not the way. Because apathy is death. That is the way that this church will die. If we refuse to wildly lament, if we refuse to whirling dance, then this church is for nothing. But instead, I call to you to wake up. I call to you to open up your eyes, to open up your hearts, and that in and through wild lament and whirling dance, we might have the capacity to awaken this untapped potential of our church to change the communities in which we serve, and to give people glimpses of God's peace, of God's love, of God's justice. I'm going to read one more quote from Dastor Astorga. In her conclusion, she writes this: as paths of resistance, both draw deep from faith and religion. Laughter, whirling dance, draws from the song and celebration of faith and religion, while lament draws from its sorrow, grief, and mourning. In both, God is experienced. In laughter, God is experienced as one who stuns with playful incongruities to free the spirit from gravity and to lighten its load. In lament, God is experienced as hope in the midst of the ruins, but hope as fragile and fleeting, and yet abiding and faithful. But where they diverge and converge, they have the power to create communities. For when we laugh together, dance together, we are deeply connected as human beings. And when we cry together, we bear each other's pains and burdens. Laughter and lament have the power to subvert oppressive systems and the potential to transform them. I had an amazing experience just recently of this shared crying that offered me this moment of healing and hope and gave me the energy, honestly, to write this sermon. to move ahead and to get through this week. I was in a difficult place, spiritually, emotionally. I had a meeting with my bishop colleagues in which we discussed some very difficult things. And afterwards, one of those colleagues gave me a phone call. And they didn't say much. They just called and said, "Hey, Felix, I feel for you. And I just want to pray for you." And I said, "Thank you." And he prayed a simple prayer, a prayer of lament. And it moved me to my core. It had such power that I knew somebody was crying with me. And in that crying together, I found great peace. I found great joy. And I tell you, after I hung up that phone, I was able to dance once more. That through that prayer, my wild lament got turned into whirling dance. I felt it. And it was real. And it can be real for you. And it can be real for this church. It can be real for the whole world. And so I call you to action. That as we embrace our new mission as Synod, to cultivate life-giving relationships rooted in God's love, I challenge you to wildly lament, to take a look around your neighborhoods, your communities, and see where ought we cry, where ought we be lamenting, where ought we be crying out to God for change. And also to look around and see where are the opportunities for us to dance. Where are the opportunities for us to be this community that gathers together to inspire and give one another the support necessary in order for us to keep engaging this difficult work. Because in doing so, we will live into our calling as God's people. We will experience life and life abundant. In so doing, we will become vessels of God's mission for redemption and reconciliation in a broken world. In so doing, we will give flesh to Christ once more when we engage relationships with others that is deeply rooted in God's love. And when Jesus is present, anything is possible. Healing is possible, restoration is possible. And with Jesus present, we have a chance. We have a chance to experience abundant life. And that's what the world needs right now. Soli Deo Glory.